It was supposed to be a normal day at Camp Stanton, a quiet military base tucked deep in the pine-covered hills of North Carolina. The summer sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the old concrete walkways and aging barracks. Contractors were brought in to begin long-overdue renovations, new plumbing, fresh wiring, and tearing down a few of the older, unused buildings. But no one expected that a routine construction project would uncover something that would send a chill down the spine of every Marine who had ever served there. Something hidden, something terrifying, and something that had been waiting silently beneath the surface for nearly a decade. 8 years earlier, Lance Corporal Tyler Jennings was just another young face in uniform, eager, disciplined, and well-liked among his fellow Marines. He had a dry sense of humor, kept his boots clean, and wrote home every Sunday. There was nothing unusual about him, but one night, just after roll call and barely an hour before lights out, Tyler vanished. No struggle, no noise, no warning. His bunk was untouched, his gear was still in his locker, and his ID was left sitting on his neatly folded uniform. At first, people thought he had gone AWOL. The base was searched, his family contacted, and nearby towns combed. But there were no signs, no phone records, no sightings, no leads. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. The investigation dragged on for months. Rumors spread fast among the ranks. Some believed he had run away from the pressure. Others whispered about something darker. Strange sounds in the woods, lights at odd hours, doors creaking open in unoccupied buildings. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Eventually, the search cooled off. New recruits came in. Tyler's name faded from daily conversations and became just another photo on the base's missing persons board, framed in dust, hanging crooked on the wall near the chow hall. But time has a way of unearthing secrets. Literally, fast forward to this year. It started with a simple plan: turn the old storage wing near Building D into modern living quarters. It had been out of use for over a decade, but demolition crews finally got clearance to gut the place. That's when they found it: a sealed crawlspace behind a false wall. Inside, the smell hid first damp earth and something else, something sour. Workers pulled back layers of old insulation and rotting wood, expecting maybe a nest of raccoons or forgotten supplies. What they found instead brought the entire operation to a halt. Authorities were called in immediately. Military police, forensic teams, and even former investigators who had worked on Tyler's case returned to Camp Stanton. Because what lay inside that crawlspace was no accident, certainly not an animal. It was human remains. An early identification matched the DNA to one person: Lance Corporal Tyler Jennings. The discovery shook everyone, especially those who had served with him. How had he ended up there? Who had sealed the crawlspace? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what had happened to him that night? As word spread, veterans who had once called Camp Stanton home began to speak up. Some mentioned how Tyler had been investigating strange occurrences just days before he vanished: electrical malfunctions in the mess hall, classified documents that had mysteriously gone missing, and an odd smell near the supply wing that no one could explain. Others recalled how Tyler seemed nervous, distracted. He'd confided in one bunkmate that he felt like someone was watching him, following him. Then there were the old security tapes. Most of them had been recorded over or damaged over time. But a few backups from that week were located in the base's archive room, and when investigators reviewed them, one clip stood out. 2:13 a.m., the night Tyler vanished. A faint figure seen walking toward the old storage wing. No face visible, no return footage of him ever coming back. Whatever happened in that building 8 years ago didn't just disappear with time. It was hidden deliberately. And someone or something wanted it to stay that way. In the days that followed the discovery, strange things began happening around the construction site. Tools going missing. Lights flickering in buildings that hadn't been reconnected to power. One worker reported hearing heavy footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, the hallway was empty. Another swore he heard a voice whisper his name, even though he was working alone. Was it just the tension of the discovery? Or was there something more lingering in the walls of Camp Stanton? As investigators dig deeper, new questions are beginning to emerge. Who had access to that storage wing at the time? Why wasn't the crawlspace ever inspected during the original search? And what could possibly make a disciplined Marine like Tyler walk alone into that part of the base, never to return? This case is no longer just about a missing Marine. It's about a mystery buried beneath years of silence, fear, and hidden truths. What happened to Lance Corporal Jennings that night? Was it a cover-up, a personal vendetta, or something far more sinister? The answers are finally starting to surface, but what they reveal may be even more disturbing than anyone ever imagined. And just when you think the story is over, it's the most chilling detail of all comes from a simple message scratched into the symbol. Maybe seen my muscle scratched into the underside of a loose floorboard, in that crawlspace 6 words, faded and nearly impossible to read. I wasn't the only one. What does it mean? Who else was involved? Or worse, who else is still missing? That's where we'll pick up the story. Don't go anywhere. The message found beneath the floorboard sent a ripple through everyone working the case. I wasn't the only one. 6 words. Faint, scratched into the wood with what looked like a nail or a piece of metal. Whoever wrote it had done it in a hurry. Investigators stared at it for hours, trying to figure out what it meant. Did Tyler leave that message himself? Was he warning about someone else who went missing? Or worse, was he talking about someone who helped put him there? Terry? Records were pulled, one by one. Everyone who served at Camp Stanton during the time Tyler vanished was reviewed. Most had moved on, retired, transferred, or discharged. But as investigators combed through the names, a strange pattern began to form. At least 2 other Marines stationed at the camp during that same year had also disappeared under odd circumstances. One was listed as a desertion case. The other, Supply Sergeant, had supposedly taken emergency leave and never returned. No formal investigation was ever launched for either of them. It was brushed off at the time. But now, with Tyler's body discovered in such a hidden place, those old cases didn't seem so open and shut anymore. One name in particular kept coming up: Staff Sergeant Roy Calder. He had been in charge of the storage wing where Tyler's body was eventually found. A strict, no-nonsense leader, Calder was respected by some and feared by others. He ran his unit tight and didn't tolerate mistakes. But according to a few veterans who served with him, something about Calder changed after Tyler's disappearance. He became distant, paranoid. He started sleeping in his office and refused to eat in the mess hall. Less than a year later, he requested a transfer to another base across the country and was granted it without delay. When questioned now, Calder claimed he barely remembered Tyler, said he was just another face in the rotation. But his voice shook when investigators asked about the crawlspace, and he refused to return to Camp Stanton. He hung up the phone halfway through the call. Meanwhile, rumors were starting to spread fast among the current troops stationed at the base. Some were spooked by the story. Others were angry that they'd been living and sleeping near something so sinister without knowing. But there was one person who remembered Tyler well: Corporal James "Jimmy" Holloway. Jimmy had shared a bunk room with him and had been one of the last to see Tyler alive. Back then, Jimmy was just 19. Now, at 27. He still recalled the tension of those last few days. He told investigators that Tyler had been digging into some unusual paperwork. A few supply runs hadn't added up. Equipment was being checked out under names that didn't exist. Tyler was curious, maybe too curious. He asked a lot of questions. One night, he told Jimmy he had stumbled onto something, but he didn't want to say more until he was sure. He mentioned seeing someone inside the storage wing after hours. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The next night, he was gone. Jimmy said he always wondered if he should have spoken up sooner. But back then, talking out of turn could land you in serious trouble. And without proof, he was afraid no one would believe him. Now, with the body found and that chilling message carved beneath the floor, Jimmy's memories had new weight. The camp's renovations were halted. Investigators focused on the crawlspace, trying to trace back any structural modifications. Blueprints from 8 years ago showed no indication of that false wall. Someone had created it after Tyler's disappearance, deliberately hiding the space. That took planning, tools, and most of all, time. Whoever did it didn't just want Tyler gone. They wanted him forgotten. Outside the official investigation, more strange details started bubbling up. A civilian contractor who had been assigned to the camp back in the same year came forward. He claimed that during one late-night shift, he saw 2 men carrying something heavy near the storage wing. They were wearing fatigues, but he didn't recognize their faces, he said when he asked what was going on. One of them just stared at him and told him to go back inside. He did without question, but that memory stayed with him. Camp Stanton wasn't just any base. Over the years, it had been used for special training ops, classified exercises, and off-the-record logistics work. It wasn't unusual for certain parts of the camp to be off-limits, even to soldiers stationed there. That secrecy, once a badge of pride, now cast a shadow over everything as the investigation deepened. A pattern of unfiled reports and quietly reassigned personnel started to surface. Every time someone asked too many questions about missing gear, inconsistent logs, or security blind spots, they were either transferred or reprimanded. One junior officer who requested anonymity claimed he was told to drop it or lose his clearance when he brought up the odd movement logs around Building D. Even stranger, a notebook was found wedged behind a ceiling tile in one of the unoccupied offices during the ongoing sweep. It wasn't in good shape. Water damage had smeared most of the writing, but a few pages were still legible. The entries were dated around the same time Tyler disappeared. Scribbled in rushed handwriting, some of the lines read, "Too many locked doors. Something's wrong. Cameras keep going out at the same time every night." Tyler said he found a pattern, told him to be careful. There was no name signed in the notebook, but the entries were clear enough someone else on the base knew something wasn't right. Someone else had been watching. The mystery wasn't just about Tyler anymore. It was about a web of silence, a place where questions were dangerous, and where truth got buried deeper than just behind walls. The deeper the team dug, the more it seemed like Tyler may have uncovered something that was never meant to be found. And someone, maybe several people, had worked very hard to keep it that way. Camp Stanton had always seemed ordinary to the outside world, just another military facility. But those who had spent time there were starting to wonder what else might be hidden in its walls, its basements, or its long-forgotten storage wings. And while the investigators were focused on the past, something about the present wasn't sitting right. A few people reported seeing strange figures near the barracks after dark. One guard claimed a door he had just locked was somehow open again 10 minutes later. Lights flickered with no electrical faults found. Most brushed it off as stress or paranoia. But one young recruit who had just been stationed at the camp a few weeks ago came forward with something chilling. He said he woke up one night and saw a man in full uniform standing silently at the edge of his bunk, staring at him. When he blinked, the man was gone. He swore it was the same face he saw on the missing poster by the mess hall. Tyler Jennings, whatever, was uncovered at Camp Stanton. It might have never truly left. And the most haunting part, That crawl space wasn't the only one. But that's a story we'll unravel in the next chapter. The next few days at Camp Stanton felt heavier than usual. There was a silence in the air, not the kind that came from routine drills or early morning discipline, but the kind that settles in when people are on edge, waiting for something to happen. News of the message under the floorboard had spread faster than anyone expected. Recruits who had barely unpacked their bags were now sleeping with the lights on. Others whispered about requesting transfers, convinced that whatever had happened to Tyler Jennings wasn't an isolated case and, more importantly, wasn't over. The investigation into the crawlspace and surrounding buildings intensified. Teams went room to room, checking for hidden compartments, tampered walls, anything that might explain how a person could be hidden in plain sight for nearly a decade. One of the engineers uncovered an old air duct system that had been sealed off years ago during a heatwave-related renovation. Oddly, the section leading toward the back of Building D had been welded shut from the inside. The work wasn't official, no documentation, no records, no order ever filed. Someone didn't just want to hide something, they wanted to erase it. Meanwhile, Corporal Jimmy Holloway kept going back to his memories, trying to piece together the last few days he'd spent with Tyler. He remembered one night, just before Tyler disappeared. They had snuck out to the far edge of the base to watch a lightning storm roll in over the hills. Tyler had been quiet most of the night, then suddenly asked, "What if there's more to this place than we think?" At the time, Jimmy thought he was just talking about the usual rumors, the underground tunnels, the black site storage rooms, the odd military transport that sometimes arrived late at night with no manifest. But now, it felt like Tyler had meant something more. Digging deeper. Investigators pulled an archived request Tyler had submitted just 2 days before he vanished. It was a formal request to review surveillance footage for a supply inventory audit. The request had been denied without explanation. A handwritten note attached to the denial read, "Sensitive clearance, not authorized." The signature was redacted. Tyler had pushed boundaries. He wasn't just curious, he was close to something. And then came another twist. A former base medic, Sergeant Alina Morales, came forward after seeing the story in a local military bulletin. She'd served at Camp Stanton during the same year Tyler disappeared. She remembered treating a Marine late one night with a broken wrist. The injury was logged as training-related, but the man was clearly shaken, pale, muttering about something he'd seen. Alina had asked him what happened, but he just kept saying, "I wasn't supposed to be there." His name was Corporal Reese Nolan. Less than a week later, Nolan was discharged on medical grounds and removed from the base entirely. When the current team searched for Nolan's whereabouts, they discovered he had been living off-grid for years. Eventually, they tracked him to a remote trailer park 2 states over. He was reluctant to talk, visibly paranoid, and had cameras set up all around his property. But after hours of questioning, he admitted something he had never told anyone. He had followed Tyler the night he vanished, not to spy, but out of concern. Tyler had been acting strange, saying he was going to catch someone in the act. Nolan claimed he watched Tyler slip into the old supply building after lights out. Minutes later, Nolan heard what sounded like an argument, muffled voices. Then something heavy dropping to the floor. He panicked and ran. He never saw Tyler come back out. The next morning, he reported a fall during night patrol, hoping that would explain his shaken state. No one pushed further. What disturbed Nolan more than anything, he said, was the sound he heard just before running, the sound of metal being dragged across concrete, and then a single knock, like someone tapping from inside a wall. Investigators now had a timeline, a witness, and a potential motive, but no clear suspect. And then something else was uncovered. A second crawl space. This one wasn't behind a wall. It was beneath the floorboards of the old communications office, a building that had been abandoned after a fire in 2018. burnt files, scorched walls, but the sublevel had remained untouched. There, hidden under layers of old insulation and debris, was another sealed chamber. Inside, a rusted cot, a stack of water bottles, and a small notebook. The pages were smeared with soot, but some entries were still readable. The handwriting didn't match Tyler's, but the content was just as unsettling. One page read, "3 nights, no lights. They only come when it's quiet." Another said, "Jennings isn't crazy. I heard it too." The notebook was signed, with initials DS. The records department confirmed a private Daniel Sutter had served at Camp Stanton during that same year. He had been transferred unexpectedly after suffering what was described as a psychological episode. Follow-up records existed. His military file ended abruptly. Another name. Another mystery. Now the pieces weren't just pointing toward a single event. It was bigger than Tyler. Other names were surfacing. Other voices. The possibility that something had been happening quietly at Camp Stanton for years. The deeper the investigators went, the more layers they found. A secret list was recovered buried in a forgotten hard drive deep in the CUM's office backup. It contained a list of names and ID numbers, each marked with a red X. Most of the names matched Marines who had been stationed at the base. During the early 2010s, several were listed as missing, discharged, or deceased under unexplained conditions. Tyler's name was at the very top still. The military command remained tight-lipped. When pressed, a spokesperson said only, "all." Appropriate protocols were followed at the time. But behind closed doors, pressure was building. Families of the missing were reaching out. Journalists were starting to ask questions. And inside Camp Stanton, a quiet panic was spreading. The tension was becoming unbearable. Troops were reporting more unexplained events gear being moved overnight. Radios turning on by themselves, distant knocks echoing through the barracks after midnight. One soldier even reported hearing someone call his name from inside a locked storage unit. He swore it was Tyler's voice. And then, late one evening, a construction worker uncovered a third sealed space, this time hidden behind the showers in the enlisted barracks. What they found inside sent shockwaves through the camp. But that part of the story we're not ready for yet. Not just yet. The moment the third crawl space was opened, everything changed. The air in the room turned heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. The space was smaller than the others, barely the size of a walk-in closet, but it was sealed. Tighter, with fresh insulation and layers of industrial tape that looked far newer than anything else in the barracks. This wasn't something buried in time. This had been tampered with recently, which meant someone still at Camp Stanton didn't want it found. Inside was a single duffel bag. It was military issue, but the name tag had been scratched off. Inside the bag were documents, some military, some handwritten, and a bundle of cassette tapes, old and warped from the heat. One of the investigators, a former CUM specialist, recognized the tapes as old field recording equipment. Back before everything went digital, these were used to log audio notes or even record radio chatter. The team scrambled to find a player. When they finally heard what was on them, several officers went pale. The tapes were fragmented, distorted in places, but certain words came through clear enough. A man likely Tyler was talking in whispers. Found the door. It's real. Beneath comes. Can't tell anyone yet. They'd shut it down. Another segment, voices again last night. Same hallway. Same time. But the last recording was the most disturbing. A voice, trembling, said, "If I disappear, it's not desertion. They're covering something, not ghosts, not my imagination. It's them." Then, silence. And after that, a sound, faint, like breathing. But not one person, several, overlapping, too close to the mic. Then a sudden thud. Then the tape cuts. The discovery of those tapes sent the investigation into overdrive. If Tyler knew what he was walking into, then the theory of an accidental death or simple cover-up no longer made sense. He hadn't just stumbled into danger, he was chasing something, following a pattern. And someone didn't want him to keep going. Meanwhile, Corporal Holloway grew restless. The more that came out, the more he felt like he had waited too long to speak up. He started reviewing the old blueprints himself, going off the grid from the official team, trying to locate the door Tyler had mentioned in the recording. And then, one night, he found something underneath Building B. A section of the camp now used for equipment storage there was a disused sub-basement, not shown on most of the updated plans. It had been locked up for years following some minor flood damage, but Holloway found that the keypad still worked. The code is Tyler's old locker combination. He entered alone just before midnight, using his phone for light. The walls were damp, lined with rusted tools and broken-down furniture. But at the far end of the hallway, there was a steel hatch half-covered in a tarp. Scratched into the metal was a single word, barely visible in the dust: Observer. Back on the surface, the investigation team realized Holloway was missing. They tried to trace his phone, but the signal vanished underground. A small unit was sent in after him, led by Sergeant Carter, a level-headed Marine who didn't believe in ghost stories or conspiracy theories. But 30 minutes after entry, they lost contact. When they were finally located, the team was outside, pale and shaken. One member refused to speak. Another had blood on his hands, though no one was injured. Carter finally explained what happened in a whisper, like he didn't want the walls to hear. He said they found Holloway, alone, sitting in the center of the room below the hatch, repeating the same sentence: "It watches when we forget." The room, Carter said, was empty. No signs of force, no weapons, but something about it felt wrong. Not haunted, but heavy. Like something unseen was still there watching. Investigators tried to shut the area down, but the base commander pushed back. Pressure was mounting from above, and now even the military higher-ups were interested. Not in Tyler Jennings, or even the message under the floorboard, but in the room itself. The hatch marked Observer. Suddenly, officials from outside the base began arriving. Unmarked vehicles, men in plain clothes with outdated clearance badges. The local investigators were pulled back. Files were taken. Tapes were seized. And Camp Stanton, once just a quiet post in the hills, was now under lockdown. Without explanation, the families of the missing Marines demanded answers, but none came. That night, power went out across the eastern half of the base for exactly 6 minutes. No storm, no damage. Every camera failed. When the lights came back on, a single message had been scrawled across the hallway wall outside the barracks in black ink. No one could trace. He tried to warn you. No one had seen who wrote it. There were no footprints, no signs of entry. But the handwriting matched the original note carved into the floorboard. Morale collapsed. Recruits were quitting. Veteran officers were reporting stress-related breakdowns. Some said they were seeing people who weren't really their men in old uniforms, standing at the ends of corridors, disappearing when approached. Meanwhile, Holloway remained under observation. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. All he did was stare out the window. On the third night, a nurse reported hearing him whisper something just before sunrise. I saw what he saw. What that meant no one knew. But the more they tried to move on, the more impossible it became. Records were being wiped, logs rewritten, key personnel reassigned. Something was closing in around the truth, and then, in the dead of night, a final file came to light, one buried deep in the archives. Left behind on an old server, someone forgot to erase. It was labeled Project Sentinel, Phase 1, Camp Stanton. But what was Project Sentinel? Who approved it? And how did Tyler Jennings get so close to exposing it before vanishing? All eyes were now in that room beneath Building B, and whatever was behind the hatch marked Observer was still sealed for now. The morning after the file labeled Project Sentinel was found, Camp Stanton felt like it was holding its breath. Rumors spread faster than the official statements could cover. Nobody knew what exactly Phase 1 meant, but the title alone was enough to send chills through those who'd been there long enough to sense when something wasn't right. And now, even the most skeptical officers were beginning to question everything they thought they knew about the base's past. The file was partially corrupted, as if someone had tried to erase it but gave up halfway. What could be read was vague mostly. Internal memos and coded language, but a few key phrases stood out: behavioral monitoring, unauthorized interactions, and containment breach protocol. It didn't make sense. What was being monitored? And why was there even a mention of containment? That night, while most of the base was asleep, an encrypted message was sent anonymously to one of the forensic techs working on the tapes. It included an audio clip labeled Sentinel Unknown, Jennings' line. At first, it sounded like just static, but when they ran it through a filter, a voice broke through. It was Tyler's. They opened it once before. That's why no one talks. I found the old report. Stanton's not just a base. And then another voice, faint but layered behind his words, barely audible but definitely human. Don't let them seal it again. This wasn't just about a cover-up. It was about something that had already happened, something buried even deeper than Tyler's disappearance. And someone out there didn't want the story to be forgotten. The next day, a second investigation team arrived, this time not military. They wore private security gear. No names, no insignia, just patches with a silver shield and the letters OSD. When questioned, they only said they were with the Office of Special Defense, a department most people on the base had never even heard of. They took over the lower levels of Building B immediately, posted guards at every entrance, and began what they called containment reinforcement. No one was allowed within 50 feet of the hatch. That's when the second twist surfaced completely by accident. While cataloging evidence from the earlier crawlspaces, a junior analyst found an undeveloped roll of film tucked inside the lining of the duffel bag. It had been missed during the first inspection. The film was fragile, likely overexposed, but one frame came through clearly. It showed a group of 6 men in uniform, standing in a dimly lit underground room. In the background, behind them, the edge of a large, round door, the same hatch now under lock and key beneath Building B. The problem: only 5 of those men were ever documented as being assigned to Camp Stanton. The 6th man, standing at the center, had no name on record, no military ID, no official presence, and his face matched the description given by multiple recruits who'd claimed to see a man in an old uniform near their bunks at night, silent, standing still, vanishing. Without a trace, security footage from the storage hallways was pulled, and one clip caught everyone off guard. At 3:14 a.m., one camera briefly picked up movement near the old mess hall. A figure walking calmly through a restricted zone. No heat signature, no security badge. And when the clip was paused and enhanced, his face was unmistakable. It was the 6th man. The one who wasn't supposed to exist. The footage was flagged and locked, but someone inside the investigation leaked a still image. That image made its way to a retired colonel named Arlen Drake, who had served in intelligence decades earlier. When contacted, he said only one thing: he was part of the original Sentinel program. He's not supposed to be alive. Drake refused to elaborate further, but his brief comment opened a door that couldn't be shut. Tyler hadn't just been uncovering supply fraud or missing equipment. He had stumbled into the remnants of something long buried, a program, possibly experimental, involving people who were never officially on record. People like the 6th man, as panic set in. Those remaining on the base were split. Some wanted to leave, others wanted to dig deeper. But the mood changed once again when an older staff member, the base historian, quietly brought something forward, a logbook from the camp's early years. Inside was a list of special clearance activities, most of them blacked out, but one phrase had been missed by the redactors. Initial containment breach recorded. One subject unaccounted for. Continued surveillance ordered. The date: June 2nd, 1994, 30 years ago. To the week, and then the question no one wanted to say out loud began to circulate. What if the sixth man never left? Not long after, emergency alerts lit up across the base. Security reported a breach in the lower tunnels. 2 officers posted outside Building B were missing. Their radios were found inside the hatch room, still on, transmitting static. No sign of struggle. No blood. Just silence as the lockdown intensified. One last chilling discovery was made in Tyler's original personnel file. Tucked deep in the archived records, someone had scribbled a note in the margin. It looked like a reminder, or maybe a warning. 3 simple words. Find the observer. It wasn't over. Whatever was beneath Camp Stanton, whatever Tyler had found, whatever the sixth man represented did, was still active. And now, with new breaches, missing personnel, and a web of secrets unraveling fast, the entire base sat on the edge of something no one could explain, and no one knew if they'd survive. What came next? The power flickered just past 2 a.m. and then cut out entirely. For nearly 5 minutes, Camp Stanton was plunged into complete darkness. No emergency lights, no radio signal, nothing. Silence took over, thick and sharp, like the whole base was waiting for something it knew was coming. And then, just as backup systems kicked in, a transmission bled through the radio frequencies, faint, glitchy, but clear enough to make every person listening freeze. Observer breached. Project Sentinel no longer dormant. Those words sent the operations team racing to Building B. What they found was chaos. The security team posted near the hatch was gone, their gear left behind, untouched, but the hatch itself was open. It had been unsealed from the inside. No one had authorization to access it. There were no logs of the code being entered. It was just ... open ... inside the chamber. A narrow set of stairs led down to a concrete corridor never marked on any blueprint. At the end of that hallway was a door, different from the others, reinforced with thick bolts. Its surface etched with strange markings that weren't in English or any known language. And standing in front of it, alone, was Corporal Jimmy Holloway. His face was pale, his eyes distant. He didn't look scared. He looked like someone who had seen too much and couldn't unsee it. As the team approached, he spoke without turning around. It wasn't just Tyler. It was never just him. We were all part of it. They tried to get him to step away, but he wouldn't move. Instead, he slowly turned and handed over a small metal object, a worn dog tag. It didn't belong to Tyler. It belonged to the sixth man. Back at HQ, the tag was scanned and cross-referenced. And that's when it finally clicked. The sixth man wasn't missing. He was listed as deceased, officially declared dead in 1994, on the very same day the original containment breach was recorded. His name was Lieutenant R. Maddox, and he had been one of the original subjects in a classified psychological experiment under Project Sentinel. The program had tested advanced sensory isolation on soldiers to enhance perception in combat, measuring what happened when human senses were overloaded, then stripped away. It had worked too well. Something changed in Maddox. He claimed he could hear things others couldn't, see patterns no one else noticed. Then he started vanishing from surveillance, peering in places without opening doors, showing up on footage from cameras that weren't even plugged in. Eventually, the program shut down. Maddox was pronounced dead. But now, He wasn't. With the hatch open and the truth laid bare, the base had no choice but to evacuate all non-essential personnel. A final operations team, led by Sergeant Carter, descended into the corridor. Determined to end the story that had swallowed Tyler Jennings and so many others, they found a second chamber at the end of the corridor. Inside were walls covered in maps, handwritten notes, and photographs that had never been released to the public, images of Marines who had disappeared from other bases over the past 30 years. Not just Stanton, Camp Holden, Fort Penrose. Base after base, connected by dates and symbols, and there, in the center of the room, stood Maddox. He looked unchanged, like time had stopped touching him. He didn't speak, just raised his hand and pointed to the far wall, where one photo was pinned higher than the others. Tyler Jennings. Below it, someone had scribbled. He remembered. That's why he had to stay. In that moment, the truth came together. Tyler hadn't been killed. He had been held, contained. Like Maddox, he had seen too much, heard too much. Project Sentinel didn't just observe mental shifts, it caused them, broke the human mind open, like a shell, and forced it to witness something it was never meant to handle. The silence in the chamber cracked like ice. Maddox stepped forward, eyes distant. He whispered one sentence. "It's not me you should be afraid of." Then, without warning, every light in the corridor exploded. The team scrambled, weapons drawn, but there was nothing to fight. No sound. Just an overwhelming sensation, like being watched from inside your own thoughts. When the power returned, Maddox was gone. The chamber was empty. In the days that followed, the base was fully shut down. Official reports labeled it as infrastructure failure. The media wasn't allowed on site. All records were sealed again. Tyler's remains were buried with full honors, but the real story never made it to the public, except for one final twist. 2 weeks after the shutdown, Sergeant Carter received a package at his home. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape. The label read simply, "Observer continues." The tape played static for a full minute. Then a voice Tyler's came through clearly. "If you're hearing this, they didn't stop it. Just remember, it's never been about who vanished. It's always been about who was left behind." And just before the tape cut out, the last sound recorded wasn't Tyler's voice, it was breathing, right next to the mic. After the tape arrived and Sergeant Carter heard Tyler's voice one last time, something inside him shifted. It wasn't fear, it was clarity. A strange peace that came from finally understanding the truth, even if it didn't come with all the answers. Carter knew now that what had happened at Camp Stanton wasn't just an isolated mystery or a buried mistake. It was a pattern, one built on secrets, silence, and the unthinkable cost of watching too closely. In the weeks that followed, Carter left the military. Not because he was afraid, but because he couldn't serve a system that had allowed something like Project Sentinel to exist. He filed no reports. He spoke to no reporters. Instead, he packed up what little he had, drove across state lines, and quietly began piecing together his own version of the truth. He wanted to understand how Tyler had gone from a loyal Marine to a forgotten name in a sealed room. And more than that, he wanted people to know who Tyler really was, not just a mystery, but a man who chose to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Tyler's family had waited years for answers. When they were finally told the full story, at least the part officials were willing to admit they didn't break down or lash out. His mother simply held his photo and said, "He never stopped serving." A small memorial was held back in his hometown, attended by a handful of Marines who had known him, even briefly. Jimmy Holloway was there too. Quiet, changed, but present. He didn't speak during the ceremony. He didn't need to. His eyes told the story of everything they had lost. Camp Stanton never reopened. The base was officially decommissioned and removed from maps. All remaining buildings were demolished, and the land was marked as restricted federal property. But the locals near the area say strange things still happen there. Lights in the trees, voices when no one's around, faint humming from deep underground. Most people chalk it up to stories meant to scare kids or keep hikers out. But those who know, they don't laugh. One final message appeared in a classified forum used by veterans from classified ops. No username, no date stamp, just a single post. Observer moved, Stanton burned. But the pattern remains. Phase 2 already started. That post was deleted within minutes. But not before Carter saw it. He didn't chase it. Not this time. Had already gone deeper than most and barely made it out. But he saved it, printed it, put it with the cassette. And on the back of the printout, he wrote 5 words. Remember Tyler, tell the truth. Back in the city, Alina Morales, the former base medic, had returned to her job at a local clinic. Life had resumed its rhythm, but she'd changed too. Every time she looked at a medical chart, she remembered the bruises on that young corporal, who had seen something he wasn't meant to. Every time she heard static on a radio, her stomach turned. But she kept going, because she, too, had chosen to remember. As for Holloway, he eventually left the military as well. He moved west, took a quiet job at a bookstore, and lived under a different name. He didn't hide from the past, but he didn't let it define him either. In the back of his shop, in a locked drawer, he kept one thing: a photo of him and Tyler, standing in their dress uniforms, both smiling. It was taken just a week before Tyler vanished. Every once in a while, Holloway would look at it and whisper, "You were right." The 6th man, Maddoxy, was never seen again. No confirmed sightings, no trace, but stories of a man in uniform, with no name, who appeared just long enough to leave behind a warning or disappear into an alley, have circulated in forums and anonymous military threads for years. Some claim he's not even human anymore. Others think he was never meant to be found. Carter believed something different. He thought Maddox was a mirror, a reminder of what happens when we look too far and refuse to blink. The government never officially acknowledged Project Sentinel. Records remain sealed, and those who dig too deep are either ignored or warned. But despite all the silence, something has shifted. More people are asking questions. More names are being remembered. And then there's the final twist: the cassette that Carter kept. A few months after leaving Stanton, he played it again just once, using a cleaner system. At the very end, past the static and Tyler's last words, something else emerged. Faint, but unmistakable, it was a second voice. A woman's, calm, steady, and recorded on a separate layer of tape. She said, Phase 2 initiated. Subject, Jennings, recovered. Observer continues. Then it cut, recovered. That one word changed everything. It meant Tyler might not have died. When they thought, it meant he may have lived for some time after. Watched, studied, maybe even manipulated by the same people who claimed he had vanished. It also meant this wasn't the end. Carter never shared that part with the others. Not because he didn't want them to. No, but because he wasn't ready for what came next. Some stories need time to settle. Some truths take years to reach the surface. And sometimes, the most important thing we can do is not look away. The story of Tyler Jennings wasn't just about a Marine who vanished. It was about the danger of secrets left too long in the dark. About the systems that forget their own people. About the voices we ignore until it's too late. So if you ever find yourself near the edge of a quiet forest where a base used to be, and you hear something strange, footsteps with no source, whispers on the wind, static out of nowhere, don't be afraid. Just remember this: he tried to warn us, and maybe, just maybe, He still is.